Very, very tough thing to get. But I think we're going to get it.
The GOP healthcare plan facing an uphill battle with the Senate.
I don't believe you're going to get a single Democratic vote, no matter what you're willing to do.
This bill is a moral outrage.
If you think for a minute running on a platform of the other guy sucked, you're out of your mind.
They become obstructionists. I think it's a terrible thing for the people of this country. Resist obstruction. That's not what they want.
President Trump is slamming his predecessor over Russia's interference in the election.
He's tweeted about it 3 times in the last 24 hours.
The question is, if he had the information, why didn't he do something about it?
Reports of more trouble brewing from North Korea. A buildup of vehicles and personnel at North Korea's nuclear testing site.
Look at what we've done in the last 22 weeks. Revitalized NATO, decreased illegal migration across the southern border. We're taking the fight to ISIS. Just as we have done all these things with those other threats, we will deal with North Korea.
I am so proud of what we've done in such a short period of time.
This last week when they had the kids at the beach. This hour, we're having a beach party on the plaza, but this coming up on this hour, we're going to show you some great kids' beach toys.
So what you were saying is, I will not come back to the show unless you bring the beach so I can continue my vacation.
Right,
and
exactly.
We listened to you, Cleve.
Where are the steamed crabs? I don't see those yet.
I don't know how much you love steamed crabs.
Gosh.
You had a date night with your wife over steamed crabs.
Yeah,
right?
we were down at the beach in Bethany Beach. Oh, by the way, a lot of great Fox viewers down there said hello, big fans of the show. Good morning to all of you down in Delaware and down in Maryland. But yeah, we actually managed to get a babysitter one night, which is so rare.
Novel concept.
And eat some steamed crabs. And I've got sand all in my heels, but you know, it's so worth it because we're celebrating a beach. This hour we're going to be celebrating, as you said, toys with kids, but we also have a big 2 hours to go.
Yeah, Big Daddy's out there talking about football camps. If you're, from Middle America, you're probably sending your kid to maybe a football camp.
Did you do that?
Football camp is starting.
My kid's going to quarterback camp tomorrow in Minnesota. Yeah.
Quarterback camp.
Why not? I don't know if he'll be a quarterback, but clearly I'm putting my finger on the scale.
No pressure or anything, Steve. But
He's 7.
Get him started now.
Get him started early. But you sat down with President Trump a couple days ago for an interview that's made a lot of news.
Well, it was an honor, certainly, to be in the Roosevelt Room for 15 to 20 minutes with the president. So exclusive on this show today, we're releasing segments of it. We talked about everything. We were there for a historic bill signing of the VA. This is a president who's championed that, got a bill passed, signed it, and it's going to help hold people accountable at the VA. But also, obviously, a lot of news going on. Health care, the resistance movement, investigations. We asked President Trump about all of it, and this is what he had to say. Mr. President, thank you very much for joining Fox.
Thank you, Pete.
Appreciate it. You faced resistance on this bill, but of course you've faced resistance on the entirety of your agenda. Who's been your biggest opponent? Has it been Democrats resisting? Has it been fake news media? Has it been deep state leaks? When you think about it, what holds it up the most?
Well, when I ran, I talked about the rigged system because I saw I was winning states and I wasn't getting the delegates that I should be getting. And, I would look at this. I said, what kind of a system? Well, the whole system is there's a lot of bad things going on, a lot of very bad things going on. One of the things that should be solved, but it probably won't be, is that the Republicans and Democrats don't get together. And I'm open arms, but I don't see that happening. If they fight each other, the level of hostility, and by the way, this isn't just Trump. This has been like this for years. You've been doing this for a long time. It's been like that for a long time. But the level of hostility, as an example, the health care bill that you are reporting on and everybody's reporting on, it would be so great if the Democrats and Republicans could get together, wrap their arms around it, and come up with something that everybody's happy with. It's so easy. But we won't get one Democrat vote, not one. And if it were the greatest bill ever proposed in mankind, we wouldn't get a vote. And that's a terrible thing. So there is. Well, look, their theme is resist. I've never heard of anything like this, resist.
How frustrating it is to have former President Obama. They're out there leading the resistance.
Well, I don't think he's leading it. He actually just put out a small statement. I don't see that leading it, but other people are leading. Don't forget, I saw Schumer criticizing the bill a couple of weeks ago, and he had no idea what was in the bill. He was saying this bill is this and it's that. He had no idea. In fact, the Republican senators didn't know because it wasn't released. Very few people knew. So he was criticizing a bill that he had no idea what was in the bill. But that's called the resistance. I mean, that's a terrible word. Think of it. Their theme is resist. Their theme should be let's get together, envelop, let's get together. But their theme is resist. It's obstruction. And the problem is they become obstructionists. And the voters, I happen to like it from the standpoint of running for office, but I think it's a terrible theme in terms of getting elected. And more importantly, I think it's a terrible theme for the people of this country. Resist, obstruction. That's not what they want.
How do you overcome that when someone like Senator Warren, Elizabeth Warren, literally says people are going to die because of President Trump's health care bill?
Well, I actually think she's a hopeless case. I call her Pocahontas, and that's an insult to Pocahontas. I actually think that she is just somebody that's got a lot of hatred, a lot of anger.
She's got a loud microphone. And
well, she does, but, you know, I don't think she has the kind of support that some people do. I think she hurt Hillary. I watched her campaigning for Hillary. And she was so angry. Hillary would be sitting back listening to her, trying to smile. But there were a lot of people in that audience that were going, wow, is this what we want? There's a lot of anger there and hostility. So, no, I think she's a highly overrated voice.
Some people might say the lever of anger is unprecedented, but it's also unprecedented for a former president to come out the way President Obama has. He came out on Facebook recently. You may have seen it. He said, your bill, Mr. President, not a health care bill. It's a massive transfer of wealth. It's going to harm Americans. It's mean. What do you say to the former president?
Well, he actually term mean. That was my term, because I want to see, and I speak from the heart. That's what I want to see. I want to see a bill with heart. Healthcare is a very complicated subject from the standpoint that you move it this way and this group doesn't like it. You move it a little bit over here. You have a very narrow path. And honestly, nobody can be totally happy, even without the votes. Forget about votes. This has nothing to do with votes. This has to do with picking a plan that everybody's going to like. I'd like to say love, but like. But we have a very good plan. We have a few people that are, I think you could say modestly, they're not standing on the rooftops and screaming. They want to get some points. I think they'll get some points.
Are Republican senators doing enough to have your back to get that health care bill through?
I think so. You know, I have great relationships with most of the people in the Senate, with, as you know, most of the people in the House. I think I work very hard. I made a lot of great friendships with the people in the House, a lot of them. Same thing in the Senate. They're four very good people. They're friends of mine. And I don't think they're that far off. I don't think they're that far off. You know, famous last words, right? But I think we're going to get there. For years, I've been watching the battle of health care. And I watched during the Clinton administration, Hillary, rightfully, devoted her life to trying to get health care. She was unable to get it. You watched what happened with Obamacare, which by the time they finished with it, it was, you know, something that doesn't work. But look what happened with Nebraska, where they gave the great Nebraska giveaway in order to give a vote.
Cornhusker kickback.
And it was a very closed session. You know, they talk about closed and behind closed doors. There was nothing more closed than Obamacare. But the bottom line is they worked so long and so hard. They got a plan that didn't work. They got a health care plan that didn't work. And I've only been there for 5 months. You know, they worked for a long time. During the Clinton administration, they worked essentially during the entire administration. Healthcare is a very, very tough thing to get, but I think we're going to get it. We don't have too much of a choice because the alternative is the dead carcass of Obamacare. That's what it is.
I opened up the failing New York Times and the Washington Post this morning. No mention at all of this bill that you're signing today. For veterans who are so passionate about this, it's such a historic bill. Are they going to cover this? And if they don't, why don't they cover it the way they cover every breathless scandal in the media today?
Well, I just heard today for the first time that Obama knew about Russia a long time before the election, and he did nothing about it. But nobody wants to talk about that. That the CIA gave him information on Russia a long time before they even, before the election. And I hardly see it. It's an amazing thing to me. In other words, the question is, if he had the information, why didn't he do something about it? He should have done something about it. But you don't read that. It's quite sad.
That never leaked out.
That doesn't leak out. No, they're very selective leaks with sources. I always love the sources, many of which don't exist. But no, there is a thing going on in the country, and hopefully it's somewhat of a sickness in that sense. But you know what? I am so proud of what we've done in such a short period of time.
Well, so
how's the newspaper this morning?
As that was going on, I was listening and reading my failing New York Times this morning. Not a single article in the main section about the historic VA bill the president signed yesterday.
Yeah.
And that's the last question I asked, is will it get covered? And it answered itself. Of course they didn't. More of what they want to talk about as opposed to the really important stuff that this White House
Well,
is
I
getting
think
done.
it just highlights the disconnect between the way the media, the mainstream media, is covering things and what's really going on. And he pointed to that directly. I mean, he sounded a lot more optimistic about getting things done, or the hope that they can, with health care, for example. He's saying, you know, the Republicans aren't that far apart, but if you watch the mainstream media or if you read the places like New York Times, you know, you have these 5 senators that still have not gotten to a yes vote. It seems like it's a total disaster, but that's not the reality of it.
Yeah.
No, and these five senators may be moved in a certain direction. Democrats, though, totally not on board. But
Yeah.
if you read any of the media coverage of this, the reasons that they're standing by and staying out of the fight on this is Medicaid. That's number one on their list, Medicaid, and what they perceive as major cuts to Medicaid, and that there would be tax cuts for the rich. And so for Democrats, they're not going to come to the table at all on this.
And their rhetorics can only get more nasty as they impugn the motives of Republicans, when if you look at what they're actually doing with Medicaid, it's a gradual and gentle transition to a normal inflation rate on a program that can't pay for itself. It doesn't kick into effect till 2021. They're not looking, I mean, ultimately, Republicans need to be able to show that competitive insurance markets can work for the poor and the vulnerable and the sick, because that's what Democrats are going to say. You want to kick them off their health care? No, we don't. We think there's a better way to do it so the health care market doesn't collapse. Make that argument, and I think you can win and bring over these Republicans, because they're not that far off.
And it's a hard number, though.
Wants to get there.
It's a hard number, though, especially with the CBO numbers. And if the CBO numbers show that they're going to be millions more people are going to be losing their health care coverage, it's going to be hard for them to go back to their districts, which they will do this summer, and have to face those individuals, which they had to face the last time this bill came up.
But President Trump pointed out health care is probably the most complicated thing that we are going to deal with as a nation. And we're seeing that with getting these votes together. I mean, it is complicated because everyone wants different things in it. Something else that stuck out to me in this interview, and it was a great interview, Pete, was just how frustrated he was. Someone that's coming to Washington, D.C. as a businessman, someone who understands politics but has never really worked inside of D.C., just how hard it is to bring both parties to the table to actually have a real conversation about getting anything done.
Well, and like the VA legislation, right? The idea that I can't just go fire someone who's incompetent or not doing their job. I have to sign legislation in order to fire people who aren't doing their job and taking taxpayer dollars and not helping veterans. Do you think that this will trickle into other parts of government?
I think it could. You raised that point, and it's a great one. Maybe other departments will realize if we can fire bad employees too, you can clean up government. I mean, this is a good governance thing, a major civil service reform that could happen elsewhere as well. But I'll say what struck me a little bit being in the Roosevelt Room and a little bit in the Oval Office is this fury that everyone says he's involved in, Russia, collusion, investigation. He's unfazed and also very confident that he can make this deal. He may not be a politician, but he's a deal maker. And that's what people sent him to Washington to do.
I'll ask you a little bit. Well, how about this? Because I'm not allowed to ask you now because we're out of time, because they'll yell at me. I'll ask you later about what, if you see a difference now before the president's trip to the Mideast and what it was like before.
That's a great question. You know what? That is a great tease, Clayton.
That is.
We will give you that answer coming
My
up.
producers yell at me. Anyway, coming up here on the show, from former Attorney General Loretta Lynch is now the focus of a Senate investigation. J. Christian Adams on the questions the American people need answered next.
And it turns out peddling fake news is not a successful business strategy. This morning's sad news for the failing New York Times. Stick around.
And welcome back. President Trump just tweeted this moments ago, quote, Hillary Clinton colluded with the Democratic Party in order to beat crazy Bernie Sanders. Is she allowed to so collude? Unfair to Bernie, end quote. Well, this as the Senate launches an investigation into former Attorney General Loretta Lynch, appointed by President Obama, and her potential interference in the election and how she handled the Hillary Clinton email probe.
J. Christian Adams is the former DOJ official and president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation, and he joins us right now. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
So is the president right to be making this about the other collusion, the collusion of the Democratic Party against either President Trump or Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, how quickly we forget 2016, where you had Justice Department officials like Peter Kadzik letting John Podesta know what they were going to do ahead of time in the Hillary Clinton investigation. I mean, look, this whole notion of collusion was the hottest story in October 2016, but it was the Democrats who were doing it. But how quickly we forget.
So Democrats saying, look, there's nothing to see here, J. Christian Adams. Look away. There's nothing to see here. Yes, she may have encouraged James Comey to change the way we call this an investigation. call it a matter, but that's not a big deal. There's nothing illegal here. Let's move on with our lives. What do you say to that?
Well, that's exactly what's going to happen. Anybody who thinks that the Senate or even the Inspector General report at Justice that's coming out shortly is going to change this story is dreaming. I mean, the job of the Inspector General is to defend the Justice Department. It's not going to have anything to build a Senate investigation on. But yet we know that the lawyers at Justice were telling Comey that you couldn't prosecute Hillary because they were putting words in the statute that didn't exist. Remember that they said, well, you have to show that she intended to harm national security, but that's not in the law. She just, if you have classified information that you're mishandling, that violates the law. So, look, this story is from 2016. Anybody who thinks it's going to change the trajectory of what the Democrats or the New York Times, which, and I repeat myself, care about is dreaming.
Jay Christian, as it pertains to that investigation, though, what are they going to ask her? What are they specifically looking for if they want to prove that there was some sort of a collusion or an attempt to change, when she called it a matter instead of an investigation? Yeah,
you have to remember, a lot of people think in these black-white terms, yes, no, collusion, not collusion. Things are much more subtle in Washington, D.C. When you meet on the tarmac with the president, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to say, give my wife a break. It speaks for itself. Washington is far more sophisticated than doing stupid things like overtly colluding. So that's why the Senate is not going to be able to get to anything, because these people are able to collude without actually colluding.
It's such an interesting point, the code speak that goes on. So if a President Trump says, hey, I hope, with Mike Flynn, you might, come on, the guy's a good guy. It's not actual obstruction. It's being honest like you would to somebody else. But you're saying the code speak is something you have to find a way to decipher.
Yeah, the Democrats in Washington play three-dimensional chess, while people out in the rest of the country attacking them are still trying to learn how to play checkers. I mean, it's just look at what's going on at the Justice Department now. The Democrats are essentially still running the place because they are still embedded everywhere throughout the department.
Jay Christian is making a Star Trek three-dimensional chess reference. We appreciate it. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you, sir. All right, still ahead. Bill Clinton back to giving big speeches, this time making the case for a big, beautiful wall.
Plus, Democrats call the new health care bill barbaric, immoral, and they say people will die. Do they run the risk of inciting more violence? Our panel is here next to discuss. We'll be right back.
A Fox News alert. Muslim worshippers running in panic after an out-of-control car plows through a crowd in England. 6 people were hurt, including 3 kids, in a field in Newcastle following celebrations for the end of Ramadan. The female driver is in police custody, and they believe the incident has no connection to terrorism, but rather she just lost control of her car. This comes a week after a man drove a van into Muslim worshippers, leaving 2 London mosques, killing 1 and injuring others. That attack declared an act of terror. And new overnight, the Koch brothers political network criticizing the Senate health care bill, calling it, quote, not conservative enough and needs dramatic changes before it would win their support. Currently, 5 Republican senators are talking about opposing the bill. And more failing for the New York Times. The paper planning a massive staff layoff, this time targeting reporters. More than 100 positions have already been cut as it transitions to more digital content. Turns out President Trump and his title turns out to be right. Abby, over to you.
All right, thank you, Pete. Well, lawmakers promised to clean up the fiery rhetoric on Capitol Hill, but it didn't last very long.
This is a barbaric and immoral piece of legislation.
It's kind of like a death part 2.
The Senate Republican health care bill is a wolf in sheep's clothing.
These cuts are blood money. People will die.
Ooh, but do Democrats, do their latest attacks on health care risk inciting further violence? Here to debate, former State Department press officer Morgan Ortagus and Iona College political science professor Dr. Jeannie Zaino. Good morning, ladies. Thank you for being here.
Good morning.
All right, Morgan, I'll start with you. You've been in politics a very long time. What do you make of the most recent rhetoric coming from the left?
You know, it's actually quite disturbing, I have to say. I was thinking about it today. If you're a child in the 4th grade and you're watching the nightly news, you're seeing Kathy Griffin hold a picture of the president's severed head. You're seeing crazed liberals literally shoot congressmen at a baseball practice. And you're hearing major leaders of the Democrat Party tell young children and tell the whole United States that Republicans want people to die. This is irresponsible. It's beyond the pale. As someone who's a lifelong Republican, but I've also also served my country in the military reserves, and I've done 2 civilian tours overseas. This is disgusting, and it's dishonorable to say this about each other. It's got to stop, Abby.
Jeannie, though, you look at the messaging war, who is winning that, and how you have these Democratic leaders, many of them tweeting out the fact that Republicans, hate the poor, they hate certain sects of the population. And a lot of people believe that because they don't actually read what is inside that bill.
I would say very few people have read the bill, including some of our senators as well. And, who's winning the war? It's obviously the Democrats. In the same way in 2009, 2010, in the last 7 years, Republicans have been winning this war of the rhetoric. And I point you to a piece in Red State in early January where they pointed out Republicans have to get a message that works. It's simply not enough when you're talking about something as personal to people as health care to talk about free government, to talk about lowering taxes. You have to talk about things that matter to people. You have to tell stories. Democrats have been doing that. Republicans haven't, and they're winning the rhetoric war. But of course, the irony here is just what you said at the top in terms of the Koch brothers. Conservatives don't like this piece of legislation, and let's be clear on that. Democrats are in this overheated rhetoric because, of course, they don't want it to move any further to the right, and the conservatives are the ones who don't like this bill because, as Rand Paul and others have said, this is really Obamacare light, and Democrats should actually be happy this is the watered-down version they're getting out of the Republicans.
I mean, Morgan, how do the Republicans win this war when it comes to communicating with the American people? Because we've all heard stories from people that have really suffered from Obamacare. There obviously needs to be a change. Even Democrats admit that. But how do Republicans win this war of being able to communicate it with the American people to say, no, we don't want people to die. We actually want health care to be better and more affordable for you?
Well, I think, first of all, as Republicans and Democrats, independents, we need to stop referring to being at war with each other. We're all American citizens, and getting a piece of legislation through should not be going to war with each other. Maybe I'm sounding a little Pollyanna this morning, but I was listening to Governor Huckabee, who was with you yesterday, Abby, and he said, Republicans don't design a piece of legislation, and neither do Democrats, because they want people to die. It's silly. We're not in a war with each other. We have ideological differences about how we want to make this country better. And the left, the leaders of the Democrat Party, need to stand up and criticize Hillary Clinton, criticize Johnny Depp, and all these people that are calling for the death of our president, and that are saying that a major political party, which represents half of America, wants people to die. Yeah. It's gone way too far. I mean, and I find it truly disgusting.
Jeannie, quickly, last word here. I mean, you think about the shooting with Steve Scalise, and you would hope the rhetoric would come down after that, and it seems like it's only gotten worse.
It probably has, but let's be clear. It was Ben Carson who talked about this as the worst thing since slavery. It was Mitch McConnell who said it was the worst piece of legislation in 50 years. Republicans started this war on rhetoric 7 years ago, and for them now to claim that, we should all just be working together is the height of hypocrisy.
No one talked about killing Obama.
Morgan, quickly.
No one talked about killing the president.
They talked about it as the most dangerous piece of legislation in American
Democrats
history.
Are literally talking about killing the president right now.
Ladies,
They're literally talking about killing the president.
The three of us can all agree, though, that this rhetoric coming from wherever it needs to stop. And right now it's coming from the Democratic side, and we all need to move on. And remember that we're all Americans at the end of the day. Morgan, Jeannie, thanks for being with us this morning.
Thanks,
all right,
Abby.
up next, will President Trump finally tell bad VA employees that you are fired?
They were hanging around. They were receiving money. They weren't taking care of our veterans. And I made the promise that I was going to be taking care of our veterans if I win.
The president sitting down with Pete in an exclusive interview to talk about the historic legislation that he just signed and what it means for our nation's heroes. And we have got the top toys for your summer trip to the beach. You do not want to miss that. That's up next.
Good camera trick.
Right. King Kong couldn't bring down the Empire State Building.
I love this song, though, and I have to say, today's one of the most beautiful days we have had in New York City. Yeah. You got to take it in, because we don't get a lot of beautiful weather here in New York.
It gets kind of swampy here in the summer.
It does get kind of swampy.
But you were down in the swamp just the other day.
You were in the real swamp.
Absolutely. Well, I was in the epicenter of fighting back against the swamp, just outside the Oval Office in the Roosevelt Room with President Trump, where in the East Room, just moments before our interview, he signed the Veterans VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act, which brings accountability finally to the VA. We asked him about it. Take a listen. We were just in the East Room for a historic bill signing. Tell us about the bill that you just signed.
Well, it's really an accountability bill. You had people that would be in the VA and they wouldn't work, or they'd do much worse than that, and you couldn't fire them, you couldn't get rid of them. They were hanging around, they were receiving money, they weren't taking care of our veterans, and I made the promise that I was going to be taking care of our veterans if I win. And they voted for me overwhelmingly. I just had in my own heart, I had a very strong obligation to take care. So we had it passed. Tom Cotton and so many other people were so involved, that Mr. Rowe, who you know very well, they worked so hard and so long on that, and that was a tough one to get through. So now they do have accountability.
Why would a bill that makes so much common sense to so many Americans, why would it be so hard to get done? Because this was a difficult fight through the finish line.
It was a very difficult fight. But look, you have many forces, and I'm not saying bad forces at all. You have unions. The unions don't want to see a thing like that where you can fire someone right away and, if they're not doing the job. It's called accountability. But you had a lot of forces, as you can imagine, and you know the forces probably better than anyone. You were one of the reasons that I really felt so. I used to watch you on Fox talking about the veterans with such heart. And, you were one of the factors, I will tell you. Then we started speaking about it. But we've done a lot for the veterans. But you did have a lot of forces against this bill. This was not an easy one.
Absolutely. When you rode down that escalator in Trump Tower, it was the first time a presidential candidate had made veterans issues a top. You mentioned it multiple times in that speech. Obviously, you've been involved in veterans issues for years. Where did that passion first come from?
I've always felt the veterans weren't given a fair shake. They fight wars, they lose limbs, they lose, lives. They've gone through so much, and I've always felt they were never appreciated the way they should be appreciated. But who appreciates the voters? And I'm not just talking about them as a bloc, which is a big bloc, but I'm talking about the voters outside of the veterans. They appreciate what the veterans have done. But I've always felt they were not given a fair shake. And then you'd read the disaster stories, of course, where people are waiting online for 7, 8, 9 days to see a doctor, and worse, where they have a disease or a problem or a form of cancer that's easily and quickly curable, and they have to wait 6, 7, 8 months, and by the time they get in, it's terminal. It's, the things that go on are just incredible and have gone on. And we have Dr. David Shulkin, who's done a phenomenal job. He's got tremendous compassion, but he's also a tough cookie. And we're getting it done, and we're doing whatever is necessary. This was one bill, but we have many and many coming. And the veterans, I think when you look at that in the not too distant future, it's going to be a much different place.
Mr. President, thank you for your time. And on behalf of America's veterans, thank you for your commitment and following through on it. We appreciate it. It's truly a historic day.
Thank you very much, Pete. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Look, I mean, this is what he has been fighting for from the moment he got in to run for president. So you have to give him credit for following through with that. And you as well, Pete, for being so passionate about Veterans Affairs and speaking out about it on television, which clearly made a difference.
Well, a lot of people shared in that victory. It's a first step. It's not going to solve the VA, but a lot of people over a lot of years put in a lot of time. And all you want is a champion in the Oval Office who will ultimately put it first. And that's what happened yesterday. And I think we've got an opportunity for a new day at the VA. He also talked about choice when we were off camera. He wants to give a veteran a choice to either go to a VA or a private provider. He's very committed to that and believes that'll be the next phase of how we fix
it. It is amazing that you couldn't fire people who are incompetent ahead of time. Unbelievable.
Well, no one better to fire than you're fired.
Exactly.
The man behind it all. All right. Bring you some other headlines this morning. We're following a pro-Hillary Clinton group appears to be behind the anti-Trump dossier. The New York Post reports that the Washington firm that commissioned the dossier may be an opposition research group for the Democrats. The paper says that Fusion GPS was on the payroll of an unidentified Clinton ally when it hired a retired British spy to dig up dirt on President Trump. Well, the man behind that report, seen here, the New York Post columnist Paul Sperry, is going to join us next hour. You don't want to miss that. And Julian Assange, Pete's favorite person, says the Democratic Party is doomed. In a Twitter post, the WikiLeaks founder slams the left, saying it's, quote, consumed by hysteria about Russia and calling their obsession a political dead end. He goes on to say, without collusion, we are left with the Democratic establishment blaming the public for not liking the truth about what Hillary Clinton said to Goldman Sachs and blaming their own base